Hey guys, I said I would do this, so I'm going to do this. This is going to be a bento tail rigging tutorial. I apologize in advance if you do hear anybody coughing there or myself. Uh, there's flu in our house, a plague upon us, unfortunately. Tis the season. The first thing that we need to do is add an armature to our scene, so that we have something to rig to. That makes sense. We need bones or we can't rig anything. Presumably you already have a tail mesh of some kind that you're wanting to make bento. If you don't, go do that and then come back. And I won't be covering any modeling in this video. When I add the armature, I'm going to add the complete, um, we just need the skeleton really, but I do find it useful to import the complete Avastar figure because that gives us its whole butt area and everything to use for reference so that we can make sure that our tail is in the right place and that it is meeting with the body. Obviously, a lot of mesh bodies vary from these proportions, but it gives you a rough idea to make sure that it's at least in far enough. And most bodies tend to be a little bit larger than the default body, if anything. So if it fits this, it should fit others. I am just going to go ahead and append another tail mesh that I have made previously, just so that I have something to rig for you because I don't have anything at the moment that isn't rigged. Um, there it is. I don't know why that appended all the way over there. We'll just put that where it needs to go. Okay, that works. Just use, yeah, that was hard to just to line it up a little bit. Now, as you can see, we cannot actually see any tail bones, right? We need those, but there aren't any. So what we'll actually do is open up the Avastar panel. We're going to go to Rig Display, and you just have to turn those on. They are off by default. That's all. Um, and now we can see, once we've turned those on, this is still a little bit too high. So we'll go ahead and move it down a little. That's my music I can hear that you can't hear because YouTube is, you know, militant about that. Sorry, it's just me. It's just me for you today. All right. For the purposes of our tutorial, that's good enough, right? I'm fine with that. So I have a tail, I have bones. I need to make the tail do bones, right? So for me, I find it easiest to just add the tail bones manually. You can use Avastar's automatic from bones to do this. But if you do, I find that it picks up a lot of erroneous weights that you don't need, like the torso and the butt and the legs, and then you have to remove all of those and redo all your weights anyway. And you know, it's a lot more work, in my opinion. One thing that we do want to make sure that we do before we begin is make sure that this little icon up here at the top, which is lock object modes, is turned off. When that's turned on, anytime you click on an object, it will change the current mode in Blender to be the same. So I can't have different things in different modes, and we actually need them to be in different modes for what we're doing. Um, I've anytime I'm waiting, anytime I'm rigging anything, I make sure that that is disabled. That will let you put the armature in pose mode and still have your tail in object mode or weight paint mode. So, important stuff. So, all right, enough talking. You want to know how to do the thing. I'm going to show you how to do the thing. So first we're going to click on our tail mesh, and then we're going to control click on the Avastar armature. Then we're going to go over here to the Avastar end panel, and we're going to click binding and skinning. And first we're just going to set this to preserve weights. All that that will do in that case is put the tail as a parent to the Avastar figure, and it will add for us the armature modifier. Your modifier panel probably looks different from mine. I have an add-on for this, which if anyone's curious about, I can tell you about, but it just changes the way the panel looks to something that works better for me, but same thing, modifier panel, don't get confused. Just avatar, armature, right? We won't be using this, so it doesn't matter that it looks different. Just know that that's what it does. So now I need to add the tailbones to my mesh. I also want to add one other additional bone, which is the pelvis bone. Now, the reason that I want to do that is because if you don't, when the tail wags, it will actually come away from the back of the body depending on how the animation is made. There are some cons to this, which is that tails that are also rigged to the pelvis bone are less flexible. You can't move them as much with deformers or animations, but in my opinion, it just looks better because it also looks like the tail is actually connected to your body. So just something to keep in mind. At the moment, I think this is set to, yeah, I need the deform bone. So we're going to go pose and weight mode for Avastar here. Because I need these guys, the blue bones, because I need M pelvis, right? I also need the M tailbones, which you can't select by default, but those are the ones that I need. So I am going to now select my tail, go over here to the Object Data Properties tab in Blender. Oh, these were already in here before. Oops. And we'll just pretend that, like a cooking show, I just added each of these, right? And you just do that by clicking Add Vertex Group, and you have a group, and you're going to actually give it the name of the corresponding bone. It is case sensitive, very, very important. It must be written exactly the way that it is in the skeleton. Exactly the same. Same capitalization, exact same spelling, everything. Otherwise, it will not work. So I've added all of those. I've just typed them all in, right? And now I have all of my bones. Awesome. When you go over into weight paint mode, these will be empty. And so for the sake of the tutorial, I will go ahead and delete all the weights from all of these. In theory. Well, there's supposed to be a way to do that. All right. I don't need those. I need to show you how to do those. Actually, they don't work either because I did this differently last time that I'm showing you this time. We got real fancy before with changing the length of the bones, but we're not doing that today. This is just very simple. All right, so we have all of our bone groups, but there's nothing assigned to them, right? And so that means that if you were to go over here to the armature and try and move something, um, nothing would move in theory. I guess I missed a little tiny bit there. But in theory, yeah, nothing would move. They're obviously not weighted correctly. Apparently, we just hung on to tiny, tiny shreds of weights here. Um, all right. So the easiest way for me to do this is manual weight painting. I don't use automatic from bones, which would normally assign you some weights already from the bones themselves that Avastar has just decided are good default values. Uh, you have to tweak those so much, and like I said, we're going to get erroneous weight groups anyway. I just don't use them at all. Tails are really, really easy. It's very straightforward. So for me, I'm just going to use the gradient tool here. We want to make sure that this weight option up here is set to 1. Strength can be set to 1, that's fine. And that the brush is set to draw. The settings that you choose here impact the way that the gradient tool works. So if I set this to subtract, then when I use the gradient tool, it will do that as well. It will copy the settings from your active brush. Just something to keep in mind. It can be very powerful, it can be very useful for weight painting to use that. So you can, but in our case, we just want to set it to draw to weight of 1. Then we're going to use the gradient tool set to radial. The reason we want to set it to radial is because if we do set it to linear, then it draws from wherever our cursor is and it will override like all the other weights. When we use radial, it draws out from the middle instead. So I'm going to go to M pelvis and just click and drag over from the side onto the tail until the base of the tail is red. Then I'm going to move on to M tail 1, which is this bone here. You can control click the bone itself to see which bone it is. Um, well, the tail one because it's trying to select the animation bones, but so it's like M tail 1, and we're just going to paint a gradient here so that the center of the bone is red, and then as it gets to the edges, it fades into a smooth gradient. Move on to M tail 2, do the same thing, and M tail 3. And finally, MTail 4, which is just the very end. This is probably not what yours is going to look like. My recommendation always is to build your tail along the tail bone in a straight line. This causes the least amount of deformation when animating because animations are designed for this arrangement. So if your tail is curved and you weight it to this, it's going to deform at the bottom and it will only work with animations that you've specifically made exactly for it. Whereas if we rig it straight along the tailbone, then pretty much any tail animation will work fine. All right, so now we can go and click on our avatar and we're still in pose mode, so we can select our tailbones here, and now it will move with the bones. It is technically at this point, it is rigged. From here, it is all about making it look a little nicer, right? Um, this is not very pleasant. If my tail looked like this in world, I would be a little bit upset. And so the easiest way to do that is just going to be to come up here to weights and smooth. Smooth vertex weights, we're going to set that to all groups and just do a couple iterations of smoothing. And as we do, we will find that the bends get smoother. Looks a bit better. So the only other thing is that each vertex is, or vertex, is limited to having 4 bone influences. That means that a single vertex cannot have weights on it from more than 4 bones. We're only using 4 of the tailbones plus the pelvis bone, so that's less of an issue right now. But for longer tails, more complex tails, that can become an issue. So you really just have to carefully balance how much we smooth our weights and keeping that limit. So after you smooth your weights, you'll want to come up here to weights and limit total, and that's going to limit uh, any excess groups. It will remove the bone influences that are the weakest. So it's always going to prefer to keep any stronger influence. And generally, what you'll find is that it doesn't change the look of the mesh too much. But if you get into really complex areas, and this mostly applies when rigging body parts, like in the chest or pelvis, is where it's the worst. But it can be an issue with tails when you're using all 6 bones, because plus M pelvis, you have 7 bones that could be potentially influencing any single vertex. So just keep that in mind. If it starts to get crunchy and you're like, I'm going to smooth it some more, and it's not working, and every time you limit total, it gets crunchy again. That's why, and you just need to change your strategy or remove some bone groups intentionally from an area to get a smoother look. And that's just learning how to weight paint. I can't teach you that in a day. I recommend that you look up a YouTube tutorial specifically on how to weight paint. That is not an SL specific skill. And there are so many ways to do it. There are so many, good practices and stuff that I don't know. I'm still fairly new at this. I've only been doing it for a couple of years and flying by the seat of my pants the whole time. At this point, the tail is technically done. In my project here, you can see that it has now separated at the bottom where the tail fluffs have different weights than the base of the tail. And that just comes down to I would have to go into this area, and what I would probably do is just restore um, some of the weights we can see. It's because these weights are different from here. Um, and so what I would do now is I would just turn this down to 0 and just gently adjust that until it connects again. You can also use this auto normalize option up here at the top, which will, it gets a little funky now, um, make sure that your weights always add up to 1 because they do have to. Now we can, yeah, get in there and just manually blur some things and make it a little better without ending up with parts that don't attach anymore, right? So but yeah, that's the gist of it. You just want to test your weights in a few different poses. If you have trouble selecting the bones, I will just drag and select because what we actually need to select is not the easy to click green bone. Rather, it is the green bones. Those are the animation bones, but the volume bones are what our tail is weighted to. So just Avastar things, you'll figure it out. Just click and drag is easiest for me to get what I actually need. So yeah. Now we want to reset the pose to not still be posed. So we just press A to select all, and then pose, clear transform all, and that'll reset that back to the default. And at this point, you would be good to go ahead and export your tail to Second Life. That's it. That's rigging, guys. It's not that hard. It is kind of a mystery shrouded in mysterious mystery, but it's just typing some names and painting some pretty colors where you want those names to do a thing. That's it. If you have any questions, please let me know. I could do another video at a later date covering more complex tail rigging, including, moving these bones. If you need a longer tail or a shorter tail, you can do that. But that is something I still have to look up every time I do it. So I'm not quite ready to do a video on that because it would just be me reading a tutorial to you or reading notes that I've left. So not there yet. Later though. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.